So, what we'd like to do in the next sort of 20 minutes or so is to sort of share with you some of the work we've been conducting over the last 2.5 years or so. As registered nutritionists, obviously we're very passionate about nutritionists, but equally where we sit in the south coast of England, we do have a sort of growing demographically, a growing proportion of older people. But what I'd like to do first of all is to sort of take you back to the beginning. So, the question you're asking now is why are we showing you a picture of chickens? Well, with a research interest in nutrition and the older person, sort of notably, we've seen a lot of sort of care homes, particularly over the last sort of few years or so. And through one of our visits to a care home, we were introduced to a lovely lady who we'll call Betty. She had been there for a few weeks, a few months, but clearly sort of causing a few issues for the care staff. She wasn't eating well, she was losing weight, she was eliciting sort of wandering behaviours. So clearly there were issues in and around her situation. So clearly it was difficult for the care home staff to provide appropriate care. Anyway, to cut a long story short, what this sort of care home staff did was to sort of think much more about Mary and really sort of delve into her life history, and hopefully that's something that we'll discuss more this afternoon. In terms of understanding Betty, change the name again, she wasn't Betty or Mary, I should say, where Betty sort of came from. This lady grew up in Ireland. She lived on a farm, and one of her jobs in the morning, as a part of a big family, as you might imagine, was actually sort of feeding the chickens in the morning. So with this background knowledge, what the care home staff did was to sort of create the life world around Betty. So what they did, they put pictures on the wall, they painted pictures of chickens and created pictures of farms, and actually they gave her some bird feed as well, so to sort of simulate sort of feeding the chickens. But with this knowledge, clearly sort of things started to sort of fall into place. So, Betty became much happier, much more contented. She started eating again, and started to show less of the irritability that was experienced before. So what this showed to us, and we have many stories and examples, is the power of stories and sort of using stories to really understand the person living with dementia, but also in and around sort of food and nutrition, because it's not just about putting good food on the plate, it's much more complex than that. So with this knowledge, and at the time we were also invited to sort of deliver some education and training. But when we looked at the literature, and as researchers ourselves, clearly there wasn't very much out there. Bits and pieces, but very sort of patchy. I'm going back a couple of years ago now. And when we're thinking about what people need to know who are delivering care, not only sort of care staff, but also informal and family carers, what do they need to know when it comes to eating and drinking? There are no sort of standardised interventions. And on a European scale, there are now some guidelines as such. But what practically do sort of people need to do to ensure that people are getting the food and the nutrition that they need? Also, there are issues around training. Do people have the appropriate skills? Do they have the empowerment, the leadership to ensure that these things are happening? Do they have the right sorts of values and behaviours in care to ensure that these things are taking place? And also, a poor recognition of how eating and drinking relates to person-centred care, something that we've heard about already, I'm sure something that we'll hear about more, in terms of how we really, do think about seeing the person with dementia, thinking about the person, and thinking around sort of eating and drinking when it comes to the individual. So, with this in mind, we wish to sort of think much more about these issues, and we had to sort of gain some funding to achieve this, and we were successful in getting some funding from the Burdett Trust for Nursing, and thank you to them for supporting our research project. But really the project has only really been made possible through partnership working. That's something that's come through sort of very strong in terms of collaborative working. And I think anything that certainly we do in the future will be through collaboration, as we heard from Nigel this morning. With any research project, building your networks is key. But also when we're sort of thinking about how it's going to impact upon the person living with dementia, the carer or the stakeholder. It's working in partnership. And what this slide sort of shows you here are some of the organisations that we worked with in the Dorset area. You can see council, care homes, because the work itself was focused on the care home community. We had to start somewhere. And whilst we wished to move into other sectors, certainly this piece of work was focused on care homes. We worked with Partners in Care, which is a workforce development agency, commissioners, as well as the Dorset a local enterprise partnership. So just to give you an overview of the aims, so as I said already, it was only really possible through this co-working, this co-creation, co-production with other providers. But first of all, what we wanted to understand was much more about what works. What does best practice look like when it comes to eating and drinking or delivering excellence in nutrition, and also recognising the importance of dignity, promoting dignity when it comes to living with dementia and delivering high quality dementia care. And then through the work to think about how we can translate the research, how we can deliver high quality nutrition, education and training. And clearly it's not just about face-to-face training or online learning. We really wanted to understand what people wanted at the end of the day, because at the end of the day we wanted to make a difference to what was happening at the current time. So I don't have a lot of time to go through the methodology, but just to give you just a flavour of what we did. So as nutritionists, we were interested in what people with dementia were eating within the care home environment. And we worked with sort of two major sort of care homes not very far away from the university. So we measured sort of food intake and also fluid intake, because we are indeed interested in around how much people were drinking over sort of 5 days. We also wanted to know how much energy people with dementia were using, because I'm sure a lot of you have come into contact with people who do elicit these wandering behaviours, do move around a lot. So are they using more calories? Are they using more energy? And how much more do they need to eat to meet those additional needs? And we achieved that by using accelerometry. And that's a way essentially of measuring sort of free living energy expenditure. We can measure other things like sleep patterns and movement at the same time over 7 days. The other aspects of the research was to sort of really sort of delve in much deeper as to those that are providing care, what their experiences were in terms of good practice. What were they doing? What was working well? What was really sort of making a difference? So we undertook a series of focus groups and interviews. So we spoke to care staff, managers, commissioners, dietitians, speech and language therapists, informal carers, and those responsible for the care of people living with dementia, to really get a holistic overall understanding of what good practice, best practice looks like. So as I say, we don't have time to show you some of the findings, but just to sort of summarise some of those. From those individuals that we did study, and we studied about sort of 20 overall, so a relatively sort of small cohort of people with dementia. But what was clear, that there were differences between those people, perhaps not so surprising, but I think it's just recognising those differences in terms of activity patterns, sleep patterns, their weight, their body mass, and how that contributes to the low intakes that we certainly saw within the group. Over half of the group were not eating enough to meet their needs. And these were two very successful care homes who were delivering good practice. But for some individuals, they certainly weren't eating enough. The majority of the residents that we studied weren't drinking enough, perhaps not surprising when we sort of look at sort of recent data as well. So clearly there are issues around that. But also the other aspect that came out of the work was using monitoring, different ways of monitoring people, or however you wish to sort of describe that, thinking about how we can understand what's going on and taking advantage of the wearable technology. And whilst we're going back a couple of years, obviously now there's even better technology that we can use to really understand how much people are eating and drinking, and to monitor that on a more sort of regular basis, and easier ways of achieving that as well. So Joanne's going to sort of give you, so we're using circles rather than triangles for this, Rachel. So we've got a sort of circle which highlights some of the key aspects that came through some of the focus groups and interviews that Joanne's going to describe to you.
So as Jane said, we developed this circular model of dimensions to deliver good nutritional care, and you'll see that there are sort of 6 very interconnected dimensions that are really very holistically sort of focused on delivering person-centred care. So just running through those different dimensions, I don't know if you can actually see the words up there, but availability of food and drink, and thinking about those people who are not drinking enough, not eating enough, who are active wanderers, who maybe have some inverted sleep patterns. It's really important that we start to break down and challenge this traditional delivery of food and drink being over 3 meals with maybe a sort of afternoon tea, morning coffee and so on. But we start to think about delivering food and drink 24 hours a day, both nighttime and daytime. But not only that, but thinking about when people are most alert and most awake, most able to eat. And anecdotally from the focus groups, some of the gentlemen seem to like their cooked breakfasts. Some of the ladies seem to like their afternoon teas. And so being able to be willing to serve maybe a little bit more food when people are willing to eat. Also thinking about the use of mini meals, grazing menus, and finger food to be able to enhance that meal delivery and having more food available. So again, not those 3 meals, but maybe sort of 5 or 6 much smaller meals during the daytime and nighttime. And that finger food doesn't have to be just the sort of traditional party food, but any sort of food that can be sort of eaten with our fingers. People often forget about the food choices that they've made, particularly in a care home setting where sometimes even now they're being asked to make it sort of 24 hours in advance. And so being able to offer 2 choices at the point of delivery. So Mrs. Smith, would you like fish and chips or shepherd's pie, where you've got the very visual and the aroma coming through of what's actually on offer, was again really dominant in being able to enhance food and drink. And again, going back to some of that conversation that we had this morning around allowing plenty of time for that decision to be made, even though that choice is visible. And then finally, around food, is around use of strong flavours. It's a simple fact of life, I'm afraid, that our taste buds start to decrease in number as we get older. The same with the senses in our nose for aromas. So it's not surprising that older people in general say that food doesn't taste as good as it used to. And that's made even worse if you're living with dementia. And so being able to boost flavours with clever use of things like tomatoes, cheese, anchovies, mushrooms and herbs, and maybe a little bit of spice sprinkled in, can actually enhance the flavour of the food as well. And then thinking about drink delivery, as Jane said, people are often not drinking enough. That loss of thirst, difficulties with communicating that thirst as well can really sort of build on that. So offering lots of encouragement, reminding people to drink, but also that social activity of drinking. So many of us do it without even thinking. And so actually encouraging carers and so on to sit down and have a drink with people living with dementia, living in care homes, and offering many different varieties of different drinks, cold drinks, foods with high water content, melon, cucumbers, ice lollies in hot weather like this, can all help. And then sort of moving on to the section in red, tools, resources and the environment. The use of screening tools are now sort of seem to be widely used. The Malnutrition Universal Screening Tool may be familiar to some of you, but also specialised equipment, plate guards, specialist plates, drinking cups, visual aids, and guidance from other health professionals. The people like speech and language therapists can be really useful here. But also coming through in that qualitative data, qualitative research, was around setting the meal times to be very visual and explicit, that it might be breakfast or lunch or evening or afternoon tea. And so, but at the same time, actually having sort of plain tablecloths and not having the tables too fussy, so the visual aids may be around the room rather than actually on the table, so that people can focus on the food and not have added distractions. Crockery colours as well have been shown to be really important. Red, yellow, blue, green, but plain colours, not patterned. The jury's still out as to which colour is best, and I think again it comes down to that person-centred care and also being able to make the food stand out, so the focus is totally on the food. And I've got a little story here that came out of our focus groups about a lady in the study who she'd moved into the care home and she'd started tipping water over her plate of food. The carers were getting upset. She wasn't eating the food because obviously it was becoming very sloshy and not particularly easy to pick up on a fork. And it turned out one day a visitor came to visit this lady. They'd wandered out into the garden. The carer had come out with a cup of tea for them both and started talking to them. And it transpired that this lady had been a really keen gardener in her younger days. And what she was doing, because despite the plates being very pretty in the care home, they were actually had a lot of flowers on them, and the lady was actually just tipping water over the flowers to water them. By removing those plates, by using plain plates, and they decided to use plain white at that time, she stopped pouring the water, simple change, and she continued to eat, and she started to put on weight again. The other things that are important, relationship of others whilst eating and drinking, the importance of family and informal carers being at a meal and participating in the meal, not acting as a distraction but being able to help, role of family members and the role that staff have to play as well. Participation in activity as well came out really strongly in helping people to eat and drink. At the end of the day, we are all doers, and many of the people who were part of our study have been meal providers. Food and drink is such an integral part of our daily lives. If you think about going to have coffee or having coffee at meetings, planning what we're going to be eating this evening, washing up, going shopping, through to sort of the more sort of festive things like Christmas, parties, weddings and so on. And all of these activities and social occasions that they mean really help to enhance all our eating and drinking experiences. And why should that change when people go into a care home? And so being able to partake in the different food-related activities, simple things like decorating cakes, podding peas, helping to plant and harvest sort of herbs, can all make a difference and help the anticipation of meal times, which gets the gastric juices going and encourages us to eat and drink. Non-food related activities are also really important. They help us to relax, they help us to want to eat as well. And then finally, the last two, one is around consistency of care. Everybody being trained right the way across this care spectrum, social care and health professionals, in being able to advise and to deliver the food and drink experience. And then finally around provision of information as well. So good communication, things like the This Is Me document can all be really important, as well as the life histories that we've already alluded to, in trying to understand how people's food and drink preferences might change as dementia advances. So, from all of that data, from the quantitative work that we did as well as the qualitative, we've put together two sets of training tools. The first is a workbook. We have some here today. We've come up from the south, so we didn't have a huge amount, but please feel free to come and see us. We can always organise sending you some more. We've also got a training film that is freely available on our website, and the details of that are at the end of this presentation. And this training material is really sort of for all healthcare professionals who are involved with the delivery of food and drink. Just pass back to Jane very quickly.
So as I said at the beginning, with any sort of piece of research, and certainly what we wanted to achieve was showing how it's going to make a difference. So what we've gone on to do is to sort of start to evaluate how the training is making a difference to what people are doing, how it's impacting upon practice, but also how it's making a difference to people's lives who are living with dementia. And since the beginning of January, I'm pleased to say that the response has been overwhelming, and really we've been really sort of taken aback with the response. We published the best part of 1,000 workbooks out of the project, and I think we're down to our last 100. So we do have some to circulate, and we'll be sort of printing some more. But clearly, it's also about thinking how this work can impact upon policy, local and national policy, how it can impact upon some of the work the CQC does when it comes to evaluating nutrition within the care home and other environments. And also thinking about how the work can impact upon health and social care partnership strategic plans, not also locally, but also nationally as well, and also those relating to dementia sort of strategic groups as well. So we've worked with a variety of people, and through the work we've engaged with other organisations as well. And just to say that we're not stopping here, we are sort of continuing the work, because certainly there's lots of aspects that has come out of the findings, and an area that we certainly do want to focus much more on, something that has been talked about this morning, is about people living at home, and particularly younger people who have an early diagnosis of dementia as well. But this, from our point of view, this is just the tip of the iceberg, and how this sort of sits within a more sort of a holistic concept is something that we sort of do need to pursue further. So Joanne's just going to very finally, in 1 minute, finish with a story.
Finish very quickly. So what I'd like to do is just tell you about somebody else who actually, this story came out as a result of the training that a particular set of staff had been on at one of our care homes. The lady concerned, again, was struggling with eating and drinking. She wasn't joining in with activities within the care home. And one day the staff decided that they were going to run a French themed day. They hung some French flags hanging around, they had some French music playing, they had some food based on some French recipes, and I suspect there was a few bonjours and bon appétits thrown in along the way. This elderly lady came out of her room, and she sort of struggled slowly along the corridor, and she heard the music and her face lit up. She joined in with a little bit of hip wiggling with some of the activity, some of the music and some of the dancing. She actually ate quite a good meal that lunchtime, and the staff sort of thought, well, she must rather like sort of going to France, had some history. They mentioned it to the family. They didn't live very close by, they weren't able to visit very often. And this lady, it turned out, had been part of the Special Operations Executive, working in Nazi-occupied France during the Second World War. And sort of a very clever lady who, I suspect on that sort of moment on that French day, had been able to relive some of the social occasions that she'd had all those years ago. The care home weren't able to run French-themed days every day, because obviously that might not coincide with other people's wishes, but they were able to build on that knowledge and be able to decorate her room and just help her a little bit more with her eating and drinking and her socialisation within the care home. So I'd just like to finish by sort of saying that good nutrition and hydration is really key to improving care within the sort of the care setting, promoting health and well-being. Thank you very much for listening to us. Those are our contact details.